Business is simple. It's just not easy. We focus on three things to help you run and grow your business more easily: talent, sales, and how to scale. This is the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. Hey everyone, Bryan Whittington with this week's Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. We have a real treat with you today. We have Kyle Smith from the Bridge Group, and we're going to be beating up the periodic table. No, not of elements, not the chart, but the chart of the periodic table of inside sales metrics. And back on episode 3 with Ryan Reisert, and we talked about math of sales, or back in my Sandler days, whenever we talk about cookbook. How do you know your activities to drive revenue, to drive opportunities? Really, that's what this brings to the table. So Kyle is with the Bridge Group that does playbook development and a lot of analytics. And I didn't realize this until Kyle told me. These analytics are just value add. Here you go. I mean, but unbelievably good stuff. So this should be a great show. So Kyle, I can't thank you enough for coming on board today. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm really excited to be here. Metrics are near and dear to my heart, so excited to dive in and talk through some of the research that we've done and see if it could help people out.
Yeah. So now one of the key things that I always like to ask first question is, okay, everybody's got data. I got HubSpot sending out stuff. I got data all over the place. I got, people talking about playbooks all over the place. So why in the world, Kyle, should we listen to you and believe your periodic table of element or table of inside sales metrics?
Yeah, that really comes down to an individual, Matt Bertuzzi. So he's our head of research. He's on our team. He put in the hours to, get his data science certification. So all of the research that we do is very heavily scrutinized by him to make sure. And I think the number one reason is that there's no vested interest on our part. Like any outcome from the data doesn't lead somebody to want to partner with the Bridge Group. So the data just is what it is, and it's presented as the reality of the information that we're able to aggregate from all the takers of our surveys. And again, Matt Bertuzzi is who I would hang my hat on and just say he does a fantastic job pulling this information together and presenting it in a way that's unbiased, and just give people benchmarks for where they should be or how to compare themselves against like companies.
Okay, now, so let's talk through that. I mean, so it's critically important to get the right information, right? And so we appreciate the work that Matt's doing. But I mean, how important are these numbers? Because you might hear from a lot of people, listen, it's sales. I mean, you just either know how to do it or not, right? So why are numbers so important? Why should we care about this?
Because we have to set expectations for what we can expect to get as a result of investment in the human capital. So when we do strategic assessments, and we work with primarily technology companies, a lot of companies in SaaS, and they're almost all looking to grow or scale. And they all have, or most of them have money to invest, but how do you decide where to put it and what should you expect in terms of results going forward? And if you don't have baseline metrics like some of the research that we pulled together, then you can't effectively say, okay, if I spend $1 million on developing a sales development function, does that make the most sense? Or should I dump another $1 million at marketing to get the most possible pipeline generated? And I don't know how to set quotas appropriately, compensate people in a competitive way. So really, it just gives you a starting point if you don't already have the foundational knowledge of an existing team to know where should you invest, what should you expect to get from that human capital investment, and how do you goal and compensate people appropriately.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot there, right? So if I'm looking at this metric, so what I'm looking at here, and let me do this, so whenever you're checking out, us on YouTube, I'll share the screen here so you can see this, but you're absolutely able to download this. If you go to the Bridge Group on LinkedIn, they have this. So let's talk about some of these numbers that you have here. So sales development. I don't know how many people out there would have thought this and if this is still up to date, but the SDR group, the sales development group, those that are out doing the active demand generation, outbound attempts, 65% of those are reporting to sales, and the other 35%, I'm guessing all of them are reporting to marketing, right?
Correct.
All right. So now how has that changed at all? Have you seen any difference there? Talk to us a little bit about that column, right? So 65% of the SDR groups are reporting to sales. There's a 1 to 2.6 ratio of SDRs to direct reps. So there's one SDR to 2.5 AEs, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And so we actually actively have, it hasn't been published yet, but we are in the process of still collecting data for the 2020 report,
Okay.
as you would imagine. So there's been some COVID impact. And so some of these have started to shift a little bit. So in terms of the group's reporting structure, it's closer to a 50-50 split now. So sales, and this isn't a trend line so much as I would say, starting back in 2012 when the research started getting a little bit more serious, when we started investing heavily in it,
Okay.
we've seen a swing. It just goes back and forth. It's not like a consistent trend where it used to report to marketing and over time a greater and greater percent is reporting to sales. Every couple of years we see these swings back and forth in terms of where sales development reports. But right now it's a fairly even split. And the one additional thing I would say is most often when we see sales development groups reporting up to marketing is when those individuals are heavily focused on inbound lead follow-up. And so if marketing sourcing MQLs, the sales development function is following up on those MQLs, oftentimes it makes sense to align sales development to the marketing function versus if they're doing strategic account prospecting or just straight up outbound, then in those instances, it's more likely that they're going to report to the sales function.
Okay, that's really interesting. So my go-to-market strategy is really going to depend on whether or not I'm reporting to marketing or to the sales team. So sales, I'm doing the lead generation, demand generation. Whereas if I'm reporting to marketing, so marketing can ensure that they're seeing that ROI from the marketing spend, that there's not that age old your lead suck, no you suck, right? and
Yeah,
and they're
yeah,
fighting back and forth. So that
exactly.
way marketing makes sure that we do. Now I don't know if you have these because I didn't see it on here, but the old numbers, I don't know if they're still true or not. Was you might try that inbound lead, that marketing generated lead, maybe 3 to 5 times, and then that just goes to the wastebasket. I don't know if you have numbers on that or if that's still valid.
Yeah, we don't pull that data as part of our research, so I'm not sure. But I mean, that's still an issue. So in terms of just direct experience, working with reps, we know that that's a problem, and either low touches or cherry picking some of those opportunities is what leads to the lower count of attempts per lead. And really, the way that we see that improve most often is by dialing in the lead scoring. Right, so it's that, oh, these leads these leads aren't good, they don't fit our ideal customer profile, they're the wrong buyers, whatever. That's where we really see that issue start to happen. So if you get the lead scoring dialed in and it's not so heavily reliant on just the activity, but you
Okay.
have some of that firmographic or demographic information factored into the lead score to make sure it's the right people, that's where we start to see that be less and less of an issue, and people really care a lot about those leads. And if anything, we have to back them off of them. It's not the 3 to 5 anymore, but we're like at 20. They won't give up on them because they're like, oh, this thing is so perfect. And reps get married to them and don't know when to let go. So,
Interesting. So there's going to be two parts off of that. So lead scoring and when to close a file, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about lead scoring. What are maybe some best practices on lead scoring, whether from a technology perspective or the how-to perspective, or anything else that would go along into it. So can you talk a little bit about lead scoring, the do's, don'ts, and what fors?
yeah, the only don't that I would say is have the lead score be 100% reliant on activity,
Okay.
because
Can
what
you
we
give a couple examples there?
Yeah, yeah. So if somebody downloads a white paper and registers for a webinar and then maybe checks out an ebook, right? Those are three activities, three high value activities for most organizations. And so we don't want them to instantly skyrocket. Let's say your lead score is 0 to 100. We don't instantly want them to jump over that 100 mark and MQL like this is a hot lead. And that individual could easily be an intern, a student. Those are the two worst titles I could think of off the top of my head. But lower level people are typically the ones consuming the most content, right? So that's just the reality of any, at least marketing organization I've ever worked with. And so we don't want to get hyper focused on people just interacting with your content or form filling. We want to also consider the component of who are these people and what organization do they work for. So does their company match your ideal customer profile? If you sell to 20 to $100 million software companies and they're a two-person startup with no revenue yet, like maybe that's not the best lead. And if you sell to VPs of sales and this individual is whatever director of IT for whatever reason, like maybe that's not the best fit. So just including some of that information as part of the lead score. I've seen people do like letter and number. Letter is the profile information. So are they the right title or the right type of company? So like A through F, A being great, F being bad, and then the number as well. So like an A100 is like perfect person and they're interacting with a ton of our stuff. That is how you can prioritize your efforts. And like an F1 is, that's probably not even going to get called.
Yeah, that's a bad tornado and even worse this. So, okay. So I really like that because going off of a little bit of a pivot here, but let's pretend that we did that number segmentation. Are you seeing people do this with strategic account management as well? Lead scoring off of current customers differing than net new customers?
Yeah. So I'd put those in two buckets. So on the net new side, people will tier their or hopefully are tiering their accounts. So the most common that I see are letters A's, B's, C's, and D's. And so your A accounts are like those top tier strategic accounts. Like those are the ones that you're going to invest the most dollars into if you're using any type of ABM strategy, or you're going to use more senior individuals to go reach out like executive to executive, that type of strategy. So like your top 10 go into that A category. B's are like the bread and butters. Those are the ones that probably going to be the majority of your total addressable market, maybe like 100 accounts in that range. And you have to use ideally historical data to say like that lookalike type information, who historically has been the best profile of accounts for us, who can we close effectively, where do we see the greatest lifetime value. Those are those bread and butter accounts. C's are ones that you want to de-emphasize. They still are close to the ideal customer profile, but you don't necessarily want to invest really heavily in those. And D's are ones that really you shouldn't be focusing sales efforts on. Maybe they go into marketing nurture programs to see if there's ways to elevate them on that list. But people typically segment into those four main buckets when they think about all the accounts in a given territory.
Okay, now and that's on net new for prospects. Now,
Yep.
are you how are they segmenting for current clients? I mean, do you see that at all? Are they lead scoring off of current clients, or are they just relying on account executives or maybe account managers or customer success managers to do that cross selling, upselling? From that, they're really not looking at marketing and scoring. They're just doing off of those relationships and strategic account management campaigns.
Yeah. So on the customer side, I think there's not a ton of consistency, is what I would
Okay.
say. So I think everyone does it a little bit different in terms of my client base and the individuals we interact with. But I'll give the main two. The main two ways that people are typically segmenting the customer is either just at the account level based on employee count or revenue. So they're like anything over uh, 250 million in revenue goes to the enterprise team,
Okay.
and then 50 to 250 goes to the commercial team. Sub 50 maybe doesn't get any existing business support, right? So like there's three tiers based on revenue, or they'll do it based on ARR, annual recurring revenue. So like anyone who spends over 100K per year with us goes to that strategic team. But really, in my opinion, the best way to segment it is based on potential. So how much do we have in terms of like share of wallet? So let's say we close a $50,000 deal, and maybe that looks like a good deal. But how much more growth potential is there within that account? So if it's like, I don't know, I'm going to use GE just because they have a ridiculous employee count. So if we sell a $50,000 deal to GE, maybe that doesn't cross the threshold to go over to the most strategic reps because it's not 100K or over. And that's where we drew the line. But there's massive growth potential there. Like we could sell to 15 more divisions or different regions, different departments, whatever. So that should really be treated as a top tier strategic account because of the growth potential.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, Kyle, because I think that's where most people fall down is they don't take that into account, right? So it might be, let's call it a C level, right? From an account basis based on revenue or whatever the case may be. But if I can expand that out, then maybe I devote the time of an A level.
Yeah.
So that it gets to be a really good point. Okay, so I wasn't expecting to go down that path, but that is some really good stuff, gang. I mean, if we don't have this lead scored scoring mechanism set up, really going to encourage you to do that. So let's talk through the how tos to do that. Do we suggest any technology to do that? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it, am I talk to me a little bit about what are some best practices there?
Yeah, I love to nerd out and do Excel modeling, but that is not the way to handle this. So yeah, there are so many different technologies that you can leverage to do this, right? So depending on the size of your organization and the sophistication of your sales function or your customer success team or expansion team, whatever you call them, I think that's going to depend on how heavily you want to invest. But so on the sales side, Salesforce, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, right.
that's the elephant. So, I mean, you should be using Salesforce, but really, it's not just having it. I would invest heavily in revenue operations in particular, like that function, somebody to own that sales and marketing tech stack and make sure that it's working for you and it doesn't end up becoming just a glorified Excel spreadsheet with people just dumping information in, but no way to pull meaningful data out of it. And on the marketing side, I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but the MarTech infographic, I think there's like 7,000 vendors or something who are in that space. So
Oh
the
wow.
marketing technology space is super crowded. I mean, the most common ones that we see are still the HubSpots, the Marketos, Eloquas of the world, and I'm sure I'm leaving some key players off the list, but those three are the ones that come top of mind from a marketing automation standpoint to help do the lead scoring, push the MQLs into Salesforce. And then in terms of segmenting the customer base, I see a lot of customers using their own platforms actually to pull information out of the customer base because the customers are users. They're in there using the platform and they gather and aggregate a lot of data from their own platforms to learn more about those customers. Some of them dump them into a BI tool like a Tableau or something like that. But yeah, those would be the big three: marketing automation, HubSpot, Marketo, Eloqua, whoever, CRM, Salesforce, and then on the back end, maybe some BI or your own platform is what I see people using.
Got it. Okay. So, and how, I mean, any sense, and I'm guessing this is going to be all over the place, right? But I mean, any sense as to size of companies that could start to get sophisticated with those three that you mentioned? And if I'm not that sophisticated, how do I even start to dabble in this? Let's say that I'm the founder, right? I'm just kicking this thing off. How do I start to just get things moving? Because I don't have maybe the capital to throw at these, all of these cool tools.
Yeah. As a starting point, I would start with Salesforce. So if you start with Salesforce, that's the one that can go the farthest in terms of your sales process.
Okay.
So and Salesforce has Pardot. That's the other big one that, that I missed. But the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. But I would start with Salesforce as a starting point. Like if you're a founder just getting going, just getting your information in Salesforce, like you're going to end up there eventually in most instances. And so having a wealth of data that starts to build up and getting your workflows dialed in, making sure you have your page layouts all figured out early on is helpful in being able to report in a meaningful way on the data. And Salesforce, from an investment standpoint, it's per user per month licensing model. So it's not extremely overwhelming. And the implementation, you can get pretty gritty and do it yourself. Like go take Trailhead classes, figure out which are free. So you can figure out how to at least get a halfway decent button click admin type level of skill set. But then from there, I don't know, there's not like a logical tipping point from what I've seen, and maybe it's because I don't have a ton of experience working with those super early stage companies of when it starts to make sense to invest in a marketing automation solution. I don't know what that tipping point is.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, if I can really encourage the listeners out there, heed Kyle's advice, because if you don't get Salesforce set up properly from the get-go and you don't have that data clean, it is a real nightmare to go back and fix. So yeah, definitely take the extra time to get that done right. So okay, so as I'm going out there, so now I had the sales development rep about close to 50-50 between reporting to sales and reporting to marketing. Now, have you seen much of a change as you're coming out with these 2020? Just giving us a little bit of an example. So last year in 2019, we're about a 50 or 48,000 base salary, 75,000 total comp, with bonus and blah, blah, blah. Have you seen that start to come down? Or yeah, because I guess COVID shutdown was back in March. So have you
Yeah.
started to see that come down? Where do things stand today?
Comp is flat. So it's been in that 75, 76 range for a while. Obviously, the biggest variable that moves that up or down, there's two. It's tenure at hire. So are you willing to take the recent college grad profile, or are you requiring 6 months, 1 year of sales experience or just professional experience? That moves the needle a lot. The 75 average is just over a year of average experience at hire. And then the other thing is region, right? Cost of living. It's the reality of the situation. So if you're in San Francisco, you're going to pay more than somebody in Oklahoma. Like
Right.
that's just the reality of the situation. San Francisco, we see these creeping up 90 to 100, even for the recent college grad profile, right?
Wow.
So, that's some serious earning potential for sure. And we see more people creating like remote offices, secondary locations outside of the major hubs, just to bring down that total cost. If the team size is going to be large enough, it starts to become a lot more appealing to go to a secondary market where maybe you can get, well under the 75K average down into the 60, 65 per head. And if the team size is large enough, obviously that starts to become material.
Now, do you see, because I see a lot of movement in the sales development reps, especially on if you listen to a number of the different podcasts, if you're watching on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people throwing out some really good content. They seem to be getting a little bit more sophisticated because with all of the sales enablement tools, with all of the information coming in, it doesn't seem like this is your grandfather's inside sales team anymore. It seems like you got to be somewhat sophisticated. But am I all wrong on that, or is that? Have you seen any changes coming down the pike with that area?
Yeah, I mean, these teams have been extremely sophisticated, I would say. And I mean, in the last 5 years, I can see how much this has changed. I think a lot of it has to do with the level of investment in the technology that helps to support these functions, specifically, like you mentioned, sales engagement platforms like your outreaches, sales labs, or Salesforce's high velocity sales platform. They allow this team to be more strategic, and it gives them a lot more data.
Right.
So when we talk about the art and science of sales all the time, that sales development function can be so heavily reliant on the science to drive outcomes, because getting to the conversation is a science. And so executing your cadence, knowing what messaging to put in it, how to tweak those levers, we can use a lot of the data that a sales engagement platform like a Sales Loft or an Outreach can provide to us, to really dial that in and increase the level of sophistication on those teams. But I think I missed probably the days of where it was like, yeah, here's your list, just like power down it and make dials. And when I came into it 8 years ago, I was fortunate enough to work for a company who already had a pretty strategic approach even before, we got access to the sales engagement platforms we have today.
Yeah, because it's surprises me that even today is 2020, even today, how many people are, here's a list, kid, go get it, right? Just pound the phones. Just hey,
Yeah.
shoot an email. I'm not going to help you with the lead sourcing. Go ahead and do your own. It's really shocking. Now, another shocking thing is I'm looking at this periodic table. Again, if you go to a YouTube page, I'm sharing the screen with this, or go to the Bridge Group, and you can download this. It's right on their site. 1.5 years average tenure. That's
Mhm.
kind of shocking to me because there's just a ridiculous amount of turnover in that SDR world. How is it 1.5? Can you give me? Is it if they make it past like a month, they're in for a year and a half, or 2 years, or 3 years, or help me through that, because there's so much freaking turnover in that area.
Yeah, this really depends on average deal size. So organizations who sell high ticket price items typically can afford to pay the reps more, and they stay in seat for longer. If you can
Okay.
find a profile who does strategic account prospecting, where we see a ton of turnover is in those more transactional sales, mainly because the barrier to go from SDR to AE is potentially a little bit lower. Like if you're selling, a $2 million ERP deal, A 1.5 year tenured SDR is not going to go be a strategic field rep who's going to go sell ERP effectively.
Right.
And so that gap is just so much greater. But if you're going to go close a $12,000 SaaS annual recurring revenue SaaS deal, like maybe somebody with a year and a half of sales development experience can give that a go and go get you 750K a year in revenue. So they're eager to make that jump, and they've seen it happen so much. But really, I think the large deal sizes, strategic, big enterprise companies are what push that average up.
Okay.
And really, we urge our clients to use Salesloft did a blog, I think it was like 5 years ago. They were early on this achieve to advance promotion path or micro promotions. And so it's like, to use simple, SDR 1, 2, and 3, or like associate, senior, principal, like whatever you want to brand them. But basically, tiered levels within the sales development function so that they get excited and feel like they're advancing and that they have control over their own professional development. That's how we get people to keep them in seat longer. If it's just flat, there's one version of an SDR, and the only way to move up is to get to account executive. We see that typically leads to faster burnout, people getting a little bit more eager. And yeah, there's also just a lot of competition for talent. I know COVID has impacted that somewhat, but there's so many people and there's so much demand for the sales development function at this point. When you get to six months of experience, you shouldn't, but people do leave their company because someone will give them an AE role.
Yeah. Well, and that's curious, right? So do you see this SDR becoming a hybrid of SDR AE, like a virtual sales rep, because they get some experience, they can go further down in the pipeline? Do you see anything change in there? Are you looking, are you doing it, hearing anything about that?
Yeah, people try it. I wouldn't do that. I think role specialization has added so much efficiency to the sales process. And if you take a junior SDR, I'll use myself as a perfect example. I was an SDR. I was booking meetings for customers, and then the company I was working for gave me an opportunity to close some deals for that organization. The second they told me that I could close, I stopped paying all attention to being a sales development rep for anyone else, because you've never done it before. You're really, really excited about it. You know that that's what is going to get you to a super high earning potential. Like that's the next step in your career. So as soon as you open the door to say you can start closing some smaller deals or whatever, you can take some of your own appointments through to close, the amount of attention and effort paid to the sales development aspect of their job completely goes away. All they want to do is close at that point.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, because I mean, let's face it, the sales development, top of the funnel outreach is likely one of the most difficult things to do, because let's face it, it is not pleasant experience oftentimes.
Yeah, you
And
get
it
your teeth kicked in every single day.
every day. And unfortunately, it's not like coding, right? I can't put in the proper code. Even if I had the right message on the right platform at the right time, that person's in a bad mood that day, it just is not a pleasant experience. So, yeah, it can be a bit challenging. So I could see why they do that. Okay, now let's talk about this next one, because this next one is like heart stopping. 3.2 months to an average ramp time.
Yeah, that's the
That's
same. That's flat.
Oh, so how in the world can we shorten that down? So, because I've seen shorter tenure. I can't remember the study, but shorter tenure. But if they're 1.5 years, and that's more on the enterprise space. So if I'm at a smaller transactional, do you have any sense what a tenure would be on that smaller transactional stuff?
Yeah, 9, 10 months.
Okay.
And so what we start to measure is exactly what you're heading towards, is the months at productivity. Like
Yeah.
that's the number one metric we look at. So if you zoom out and you're not evaluating the performance of an individual SDR, but you're evaluating the performance of your sales development function, like your whole team, however many people that is, the months at productivity is the number one thing that typically says that this team is successful or not. So 1.5 years of tenure minus 3 months of ramp, call it, means you get 1 year at productivity for every SDR. And so if you can find ways to make sure that that stays at a year, or maybe goes to 12, 13, 14 months, all of a sudden the ROI of your sales development function as a whole starts to really dramatically increase. If you promote at 6 months, which a lot of companies do, that means that you maybe got 3 months of full productivity out of that individual, and you're just constantly ramping people. The ROI of sales development um, becomes a lot more difficult to realize when that starts to creep down.
Interesting. So I've always couched this to average sale, right? So
Yeah.
because it looks at profitability, average sale, average lifetime value of the customer. So
Yeah.
you're saying not only should we look at that, which is important, but then really look at the tenure of that team member, because if you start to see a lot of turnover, you're never going to see full productivity, full optimization then.
Yeah. If your team, if let's say I have an 8-person team,
Okay.
if if 1 to 1.5, like whatever, 1 to 2 people on my team are basically constantly in ramp and producing like 20, 40, 60% of a fully ramped person, it's going to be really difficult for over the course of a whole year for that sales development function to produce what they should in that, the average is 2.5 million in sourced pipeline per SDR per year. And
Okay.
so if I'm trying to get my team to be at that average, but I am just constantly ramping people, and my legs are being cut out from under me by my own company because they just keep poaching my best. And it's not the other thing is it's the best SDRs who get promoted, right?
Right.
Like so you as soon as I get somebody to the point where I'm like, yes, this person is going to get the team as a whole to the number, boom, they get plucked. And now I have a junior person to replace them. So like that gap, I went from best person who's getting me the most meetings and sourcing the most pipeline, and the person who comes up behind them just got hired. So like there's a huge delta in productivity between those two, which makes it really difficult. So this can't be controlled by sales development alone. Uh, because you just don't have the control. It has to be the whole sales function. So you have to make sure that you have protections in place. That's where that achieve to advance model works really, really well. That the AE leadership team or whoever that next level up from you is in agreement with the sales development leadership team on like minimum requirements to actually start plucking from sales development. So you can't just take people the second you think they're good or you like them or they do, they have 2 good months. You can't just take them at that point. And then the same thing on the recruiting side. COVID has changed this a little bit. It was really, really hard to attract the best SDRs. There's
Right.
so much competition for that talent. And so what started being really popular to introduce into job descriptions was we will promote you really fast. And that's a great sales pitch. Like, I want to go work for that company. I'm only going to have to do this SDR job for a little bit, and then they're going to put me in an AEC. And that's how recruiting teams, and that's the way it was written in job descriptions, how people had their expectations set in the early stages of the recruiting process. So then I'm sitting there, I'm 6 months in the role. I'm like, I'm ready to be promoted. This is why I took the job here. You said I was going to get promoted fast. And then we have all of that tension. So I think it has to be, it's not just sales development, it's recruiting, setting appropriate expectations on the front end, investing in the team, making sure you have a tiered model, you have enablement to train them and make them feel like they're growing. And you have a sales team who's on board with your goal to keep them in their seat for a year and a half.
Okay, got it. So everything to keep them in there a year and a half. Now, this is another piece that just boggles my head. 45 dials a day. Like I'm going on the far right, top challenges, productivity and performance. Yeah, 45 dials in a day. Oh my gosh, right? So is that consistent? I mean, there's so much stuff out there right
Yeah.
now that I can ramp that sucker up. I mean, are we still seeing that 45? Is it improving? Is it getting worse?
It's flat. That being said, 45 is the average and still is now. I think maybe it's 46, but same thing.
Okay.
And that makes up roughly 50% of the total activity. So total activity is still up in that 90 range. But that being said, I have customers right now whose reps are in the 120, 130 total activity count per day. I have reps who are doing 30 activities a day.
Okay.
And so it's all over the map. 45 is still the average. Yes, they have sales engagement technology, but what they have to put into their messages has also dramatically changed. So when I first started 8 years ago, it very much so was still, at least the methodology of the company I was working for was dial for dollars. Basically, like the activity has to be there. Now, even with all the activity being there, you just don't get the same pop coming back to you because there's so much noise. I looked at HubSpot data recently, and out of their CRM, just email volume. So total sender volume has doubled since COVID. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling it in my inbox. So I see how much that email volume has increased. I think I've seen researchers that say the average executive gets 257 emails per day, right? So there's just so much noise out there that it's difficult to break through and get someone to listen to you, which means now if you're a sales rep, right, I'm adding a human element to the process. So your only value add is some level of personalization, customization of that message, which is limits how much you can do in a given day if you're personalizing your voicemails, your social touches, and your emails. So that's, I think, in my opinion, that's what's keeping it down at that 45 number.
Got it. Okay. So that 45 number is high customization, high relevancy. And I have up on my screen here. So again, if you're on the YouTube channel or you can check it out through HubSpot, just Google HubSpot COVID data. Yeah, this right here, Kyle, is what you've been talking about. I mean, September 14th, that week, it was 98% above pre-COVID era. And one thing that kind of was surprising me is you're starting to see this outbound attempts on dialing is starting to pop up. So you're up 20% week of 9/21 versus pre-COVID. So it's starting to come up a little bit because nobody's answering their emails anymore because we're just getting overwhelmed. And I can't remember who I was talking to, but even LinkedIn is getting pretty spammy from a prospecting approach. I mean, with all of this AI, like I had to put in what do you call it? Emojis in my name. So I know whenever something's AI in me versus versus somebody reaching me cold or reaching me specifically. So yeah. Okay. So that 45 dials though. So you're saying even with that low count, they're averaging 21 appointments a month. Is that quota? Oh, that's quota. That's not actual. What's the likelihood of them hitting that?
High 60% of reps, 67, 68% of reps will achieve quota.
Okay.
The 21 is an average based off of companies who use an introductory meeting model.
Okay.
And the way we define introductory meetings would just be right person, right company, willing to take a call.
Right.
So really low bar for the meeting. That's where we see that number go into that 21 range. And that's basically one a day. They're going to book a meeting a day.
Exactly. And then now, even with all of this automation, even with the different tools, that one a day should be expected.
So if I was a company setting goals for my team, I would work backwards off of pipeline. So I would start with the 2.5 million in pipeline. Consider what that means in terms of your average deal size so that you know how many actual opportunities you need. And then think about what your meeting to op conversion rate is likely to be. I think that 50 to 60% is probably a fairly reasonable number, and start to work backwards to get to how many meetings should that be on a monthly basis to get you back down to that 2.5-ish million in pipeline per SDR per year. I think starting with the meeting count is something that is easier to do, but it's really heavily dependent on your average deal size. If you have a 100K average ticket price, you're very unlikely to book 21 meetings a day. So maybe your number is closer to that 8 to 10 range. But if you have a $10,000 ARR product, like maybe your number is 28. So I think you really need to think about what's the pipeline expectation and then start to work your way up from there.
Interesting. Okay. So, and by the way, if you'd like, we have a whole entire calculator. Feel free to reach out to me and we can kick you over that calculator so you can reverse engineer, like Kyle said, right? What's the outreach to number of, engagements, conversations to booked meetings to kept meetings to pipeline opportunities, and then pipeline opportunities to a closed one. So if you're able to reverse engineer that, then I say, hey, I need blank closed ones in a month. Well, I just reverse engineer my activity levels. So that way I know how many meetings booked and kept that I need. Therefore, I know how much outreach that I need to do. Therefore, I know size of team, and I can just use all of these numbers and statistics that you've given me to build out my whole entire sales structure. I mean, that's really what you guys are doing.
Yeah. And so I'm going to go back to one of the first questions you asked is why and how do people use this? And so what you just outlined is so important is knowing the metrics from top to bottom. So how do we get from 45 dials down to revenue and
Yeah.
all the different checkpoints in between? And so what this data does is allow you just to decide where you need to focus and put emphasis, because the answer can't always be just do more. So if the answer to improving how much revenue you're realizing from both efforts, SDR or AE, is just make more calls, that's not going to be well received by your team for very long. Teams get really fatigued if you're just up there cracking the whip. But what you can do is understand which of those conversion rates. Do I have a connect rate problem? Because you have at least an idea for what an average connect rate would be based on this data. Do you have a meeting held rate problem? Do you have a conversion of meeting to op problem? Like, where is your biggest issue when you look at that full funnel of conversion metrics as compared to benchmarks? So then you can, as a frontline leader or director level type person, double click in to say, how do I now fix this? And so I think that's what this data provides. It lets you know where you should focus because it lets you know where other people are um, against where you're at.
Yeah. Now, where do you have on here? And forgive me. Where do you have the conversion rate of outreach to?
It's not on the periodic table. What it is in is the SDR metrics and compensation report,
Okay.
which it's long, but there's a lot of data in there. And so, but what I would say is, and I haven't seen the 2020 data yet, but just anecdotally from work with my clients, as you would imagine, the connect rate is not so good right now.
Yeah.
With everyone working remotely, that email volume increase, everything that we just talked about, connect rate right now, we're still struggling to get like 4 to 6%, and historically, like 7 to 10% connect rate was what we would expect, like a long time ago, and now 4 to 6, and we're like, yeah,
Yeah.
4 to 6% of our outreach is resulting in a meaningful conversation.
Yeah. Because it seems like, yeah, pre-COVID, it was in and around there, and then post, we were doing okay there, but it's gone down and gone down. And right now, I'm not sure if you're finding the same, but it seems like it's harder and harder to get good data, because what was good data, what was validated with 10 million people out of work, and unfortunately, we're seeing second rounds of layoffs here coming down the pike too. It seems like that's even getting more difficult, and then those that are engaging, it's a little bit even more of a challenge to get them engaged, because they're like, whoa, 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 we got so much stuff going on. But so it's a real curious thing, which makes me wonder that 45 dials to 21 meetings quota, 60% are keeping that. um it's, you might need the activity up, you might need go into this productivity and performance, gets into that recruiting and hiring. Do you have the right talent? Forecast accuracy, which is going to come from right data in place. I mean, data's always been important, but I mean, are you seeing the importance of data even being elevated further than what it was previously? Or what would you say from a data perspective, Kyle?
Without a doubt. So we could, in the past, fall back on relying on the people doing the outreach to navigate a phone tree or to call around, ask for referrals or whatever. Now no one's picking up the phone. So if somebody does pick up the phone, it needs to be the right person. So Trish Bertuzzi, my boss and the Bridge Group CEO, has said for a long time she would trade headcount for data, good data, that
Yeah.
is. So if you have limited budget, I would really strongly consider if you are going to max out your headcount with that, or if you're just going to invest more dollars into your data resources, like somebody like a Zoom Info or something like that, to make sure that the team that you do have in place has the best possible data so that they can get access to these people. A lot of the data vendors now, rightfully so, are focusing on the percentage of, at a minimum, direct dials. A lot of them are getting good with mobile numbers as well. And so leveraging those has been super impactful in how we're fighting back against the low connect rate a little bit. But yes, I could not agree more. I think data has always been really important, and I would trade headcount for data, but it's even more so now.
Yeah, and the curious thing, we found recently, I'm not sure if you're seeing this, Kyle, is that people are saying, "Hey, we have directive, we're not allowed to give out information, so they can't even give you introductions to the folks." No, that's not the the most common, but I'm seeing more and more of that as I'm on the phones with my team doing this outreach is they're not even allowed to tell you who to reach out to sometimes. So that's been another segment. Okay. So my gosh, I could talk about this all day and I didn't realize how the time here. So let's kind of start wrapping this up. So definitely check this out. 45 dials a day. When you're being a lot more strategic, a lot more relevant, trying to get about 21 outbound or 21 discovery calls or exploratory calls per month. So a little bit about one a day, call it one a day, a little bit more than one a day, but that's going to be that's going to be based upon your average deal size and everything else. Look at all of the reports that are on the bridge group so you can really break this down. But I mean, just a lot of good stuff here. And let's talk about these challenges real quickly. We have productivity and performance. One thing that you've seen as the biggest impact of how can we overcome productivity and performance? Shameless plug on your part coming up in 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah. From a productivity standpoint, actually, I would go to the tech first. From a productivity standpoint, I'll hit on that data piece again. If people aren't hunting for the contact information to get to the right people or even find the right titles and it's already served up to them in their CRM, they have a lot easier time achieving higher productivity. And if you invest in something like a sales engagement technology, make sure your sales force is clean and it's not a nightmare. So I would invest in the tech stack. And then additionally, making sure that you're enabling them so that they're not having to decide what to say and who to say it to all the time. And you do all the work on the front end, developing something like a sales playbook so that when the rep sits down in their seat and they start making calls, they're just in execution mode. And it's not like, how should I manage this prospect? What do I say to them? How do I know what to do next? It's all been figured out for them and they just have to execute on the plays. So I would say those two things in terms of overcoming productivity and performance.
Yeah, since Kyle was nice and didn't give a shameless plug, I mean that's really one of the things that the Bridge Group does is they build out those playbooks and help train to those playbooks. So that's the productivity and performance. So I love that. So tell them how to do it, teach them how to do it, and then give them the tools to do it. Recruiting and hiring, any best practices that you're seeing there?
Recruiting and hiring just got a lot easier, unfortunately, right? So it's a unfortunate positive occurrence from everything that we've seen. That's starting to swing back again, but we saw posts that used to get 2 applications because you can see it on LinkedIn, right? It shows how old the post is and how many people have applied. We saw a 1-week-old post that used to get 2 applications in the immediate time period after, we'll call it the post-COVID era. We were seeing 1-week-old posts with 200 applications.
Yeah.
So there's more volume coming in. I think just be conscious of your job descriptions, sell the role a little bit, treat your hiring funnel like a sales funnel, and have a defined process to go from all your applicants to the people you're actually going to make offers to, and just care about it. I know that sounds silly, but too often people will interview people and then like just go dark on them, not get back to them. Just be great about your communication process, invest in that, treat it like a sales process because it is. You're selling somebody to come work for you, from the way that the job post is written to every interaction they have with HR, frontline management, and their potential peers.
Yeah, and just like Kyle's pointed out on the sales side, the recruiting and hiring side, it has the same sales enablement, if you will. You know, you have the CRMs, you have the assessment tools, you have the productivity tools like on-demand video interviewing, and all of these different things. So if my belief, right, that's why it's the Talent Sales and Scale show. If you don't have the right talent, I don't care how good of tools you have, it's just bad talent doing a really poor job more quickly. So we really have to have a nice blended approach here. And then from forecasting accuracy, I think that we nailed that one. Is if you have the right tools in place with the right data, that's going to give you the forecasting ability if you're doing the math of sales and knowing how you're doing against benchmark. Ramping new hires, we didn't really hit that one at all, Kyle. Any suggestion there? I mean, have you found any ways of decreasing time to ramp?
Yeah, role specific onboarding. So oftentimes, no one likes onboarding. It's not a super fun part of anybody's job unless you're a dedicated, if you're a bigger company, they have teams who are dedicated to this. So let's exclude them from the conversation for a second. Think about people who are a little bit leaner and need to be more nimble in their approach. You still need to define dedicated role-specific onboarding plans. If you try and jam an SDR into a typical AE onboarding, it's just not going to be right. Some of the information is relevant, but not all. So it needs to be role-specific and contain information that is going to be helpful for just their job function. So we don't need to necessarily train them on every single aspect of your product or technology in the first 2 weeks. Like maybe it makes sense to layer that stuff in later and give them what they need to do their job today so that they can get on the phones, and then layer more training in after. So I would say specifically for sales development, make sure you have sales development onboarding built specifically for them, and space out some of the training for later because they don't need it right now.
Yeah.
Let them get on the phone sooner and then bring in more knowledge after they've been able to make a couple calls, maybe talk to a prospect and then come up with some more intelligent questions.
Yeah, I'd say that's smart. So, and I'd also encourage for the founders, owners, leaders, sales leaders on the listening to this is, what do they need to know by when, where can they find it, and how are you going to test that they know it and can apply it, right? So if you do those four pieces, and I would really interview your current team, hey, what do you wish you would have known and by when? You can put a whole entire playbook together for that training and onboarding and testing them against it, right? So that's a critical key piece there, especially if you only got a year out of them, if you're lucky, and that's going to directly impact ROI of this whole entire development piece. You might want to make sure that we're focusing in on that. All right, and then lastly, coaching and
Sorry, hold on.
development.
Sorry, one other thing on the ramping.
Yeah,
Also, get them out of the conference room. I know people aren't in offices right now, but get them out of the conference room. So that apprenticeship type approach, like call shadowing, watching somebody else who does the job that you're about to do it their way, can be super helpful. If 100% of your onboarding takes place inside of a conference room, it's more difficult for that person to actually ramp effectively.
interesting. And a lot of these technologies that we're talking about, these sales enablement tools, you can dial together even if they're remote.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different ways of doing it. So I really like that, right? It's whenever I was in the military, OJT, on the job training, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to get a lot more out of that. And for the management and the leaders, what I'd really suggest is you do it and suck it up, right? You do it, have you self critique, do it again, have them critique you, do it again, and then have them do it and you coach them, right? So it's make sure that you can walk the walk. I don't think you can really ever get away from that. Just suck it up and get it done. And then lastly, the coaching and development. And I'm surprised about this coaching and development because, oh my gosh, everyone's like a coach these days, training out the yin yang. I got free stuff on LinkedIn. Everyone's training. So I saw something like 75% of all training is ineffective. So, like, what should we look for there as a former trainer, right?
Yeah, from a coaching standpoint, not to keep going back to technology, it's not a magic pill, but I mean, the Gongs, courses, exec visions of the world, the conversation intelligence platforms have completely changed how we coach. It's no longer you're just wandering around the cubes and you wait to hear somebody say something stupid and you go over and coach them on how not to say that same thing again. Now you can really dive into every conversation, do it with the reps. Right? I've heard the game tape analogy, but you analyze the game tape and identify how you're going to improve going forward. So conversation intelligence has completely changed this in my mind, but also just build it into the budget. So I'm not saying you need to use an outside firm. If you want to hire an internal trainer, great. If you want to hire an outside trainer, fantastic. But build training and ongoing enablement into the budget, some way, shape, or form, because the butts and seats approach is just not the right long-term strategy for your organization. I can promise you that. So yeah, build it into the budget and invest in it.
Got it. So, listen, I really love the stuff here. So tons of great information. So as we're winding down here, any lesson? I mean, you've given us so much. I mean, anything that we can learn from you, Kyle. Lessons learned, times that you that hurt, right? What challenges have you overcome that you want to share with us around this? Understanding the numbers, sales development, all of the things that you're working on. What can you teach us so we don't have to go through that same pain that you have?
Yeah, I would say look at the benchmarks with some set schedule. I don't care if it's quarterly or monthly, but not every day. Know your numbers and feel really confident in the knowledge and the quality of the data in your own numbers. And then at periodic points in time, reference them against whether it's our research or any third party research to see how you're stacking up, but stay focused on your team and the numbers that you're seeing, but really focus them only as a means to direct coaching or training or development or process changes, whatever. Don't just look at the numbers and think about them as like, oh, we just need to get better here. Then the metrics tell you where to focus. That's it. So once you know where to focus, then you have to do the actual hard work of identifying how you can actually improve your different conversion rates.
Yeah, so let's hit on that because it's critical, right? If my outreach to engagement, outreach to conversation is low, it's going to be one of two things. It's going to be the list, or it's going to be the message to
Yeah.
that list, right? So that's going to be one piece, and then my engagement to meetings booked, that's likely going to be the messenger who's giving the message or the message again, right? It could be potentially a list, but that's more the engagement level. And then if I'm getting meetings but they're not keeping, that's either going to be the messenger, or if something's going on and maybe you're super
Qualification.
commoditized. Yeah, right. Say again.
The qualification.
Yeah, qualification. And then
Did you
from
ask pain questions? Did they even want to be on the meeting, or did you just hustle them into it? Right. Like those are typically when we see the meetings falling off.
Yeah, correct. Because if you got the commission breath, you're pushing so hard for the meeting, they're going to take it just to get away from you, and then
Exactly.
they're going to no show. So 100%, you hear it all the time. And then yeah, and then pipeline management. Are you setting good expectations across the way? And so yeah, know your numbers and what they mean. They tell a story. So that's really good. All right, so resources that you would recommend that we should be reading, listening to, watching. I mean, what are some resources you might suggest?
I love podcasts. I used to read more blogs. Now I'm like podcast obsessed. It's probably not a good direction to be going in, but I really like John Barrow's podcast. His is another great one. Outreach and Sales Op both have good podcasts out there. And then from us, be on the lookout for the 2020 SDR Metrics and Compensation Report. I'll check in with Matt again later this week, but it'll be out within the next 6 to 8 weeks would be my assumption. So be on the lookout for that. If you subscribe to the blog, then you'll get instant notifications of it. Don't worry, we don't spam our blog subscribers.
Yeah.
Basically just deliver the research. So it'll be ready soon so you can get the updated numbers and see what other people are doing out there.
Great. Look forward to that. All right. And then what's the future hold? I mean, what trends do we need to be aware of? What should we be watching out for? What's going to come up and bite us in the backside?
One of the things that we talked about is just keeping an eye on that SDR tenure. So Matt, again, not to keep referencing Matt, but Matt Bertuzzi on our team did some research last year on the fail rate of SDRs who are promoted too soon. And too soon rate seems to be somewhere in that 15-month range. So we know that you want to invest in your people. We know how hard it is to find good AEs, and internal promotions are a great talent pool for your future AEs, but find ways and build infrastructure around them to keep them in seat for long enough. If you don't, that's the thing that's going to bite you. And at some point in time, COVID era has increased this even more, but we're seeing it even before. The CFO is going to say, we're spending a lot of money on sales development as a whole. Again, starting to look at your whole team. And if you're not sourcing enough pipeline that's leading to revenue from that whole team investment, you're going to be in some trouble. And they might say, why do we need sales development? And so just protect yourself from that. Make sure you're focusing on those months of productivity. Otherwise, that will bite you. That's a promise.
Yeah, that's some sound advice there. Well, Kyle, you've been a great guest. I can't thank you enough. So who should reach out to you? How should they do it? And why should people reach out to you and your group?
Yeah, anyone who wants to talk about anything sales development, feel free to reach out. So our focus is primarily in the technology space. That being said, anyone who wants to talk sales or sales development, problems that they're having, issues that they're trying to overcome, we're always available as a resource. If that leads to formal engagement, fantastic. If not, still love having those conversations. Hit us up on LinkedIn. Again, Kyle Smith at the Bridge Group, or submit a contact us on our website. I guess it's pretty easy to get in contact with us.
Yeah, good. And they're all over the place between Trish and Kyle. Does Matt post stuff as well, or is it mostly you?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Matt posts on the blog pretty frequently. He wrote a book on developing or I guess you would say, building out Salesforce Lightning experience specifically for sales development to help improve their efficiencies on that side. So he's pretty
Oh,
plugged
interesting.
into the ops community.
What's the name of that book? So you can see it. He's reaching back to his pile of
Lightning
Lightning
Sales
Sales
Ops.
Ops. All right,
Yeah.
perfect. Lightning Sales Off by Matt Pertusi.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, love it. Well, Kyle, I can't thank you enough for your time and expertise and for all the great stuff that you're pushing out there. So, on behalf of Kyle Smith and the Bridge Group, this is Bryan Whittington with the Talent Sales and Scale Show signing off. Get after it. See you.